And it was a little basement apartment. There was a little door that went from the side of the house down to my one-room little apartment. And as I was getting near the door, I saw there it had an outside door. It was still had a screen door on it, even though it was the winter. And I saw it was open in the snow. And I thought, that's strange. I wonder, I know I locked the door. And I couldn't figure out why it was open. As I got to the foot of the door, I looked down, and in the snow, it had melted, was a big bowl. I can't remember if it was
Chili.
Chili, that's it, yeah. If it was a big bowl of chili, a big bowl of salad, some rolls, a whole meal. Nobody knew that I was out of food or money. I just picked it up. I figured the Lord was going to do something. I picked it up, I unlocked the door, it was locked. I walked down, so nobody even went down. Nobody could have seen that my little refrigerator was empty. I went downstairs. I had a great meal that night. I went to bed, kept Matthew 6:33 open the next day. I got up, and my landlord said, hey, you have a letter here, Jim. I said, I do. I said, yeah. Opened up the letter, and I had money in it that somebody had given me. I had met a person, a young person that wanted to serve the Lord and was really faithful serving the Lord. And I knew they had a need. And God hit me in the heart and said, and I knew exactly what they needed. And I had enough and was providing some of my food with this money I had. But God convicted me. And this was a few days later. And I was getting close to running out of money again. And God, I knew this person had a need. And how dwells the love of God in you? If you've got something and a brother has a need and you don't give it to him, how dwells the love of God? I said, well, Lord, this is all I got now. I gave that person all the money I had left. Well, here's what happened. When I left Colorado Springs and went up to Greeley to start that church, I took all the money out of the bank I had, which was just a few $100s. I got a letter that same day, the day I gave the rest of my money away, from the bank where I took all my money out. In the letter, it indicated the amount of money that I had. You're just not going to believe this. You're not going to believe it. I'm going to tell it to you anyhow. I don't tell too many people these stories. The money I gave away was the exact amount that the bank said I had. I went to the bank to pull that money out. When I went to the bank, I told the little teller, I said, I thought I pulled all my money out. And they said, they looked at my account and said, no, you've got this amount of money. I said, I didn't want to say a whole lot. I didn't want him to think, don't give it to me. But I said, are you sure that's right? He said, oh, yeah. Do you want it? And I said, okay, I'll take it. I took it out again. Somehow that bank made a mistake. I got the exact amount of money back that I gave away. I could go on. I won't keep going. But you won't see miracles in your life until you get out of the boat. You can't walk on water if you're sitting in a boat. God can't show his hand in your life. Never can, nor will he, until you obey him. Now, he may not always tell you to do everything he's told me to do, but obey what he showed you. And your money is, I want to tell you, this is message 101 for spiritual babies. What I'm sharing is for babies. This is the first step of a Christian life. Did you know this? This is the first step. Why? Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him what? Forsake all he has, in one place he says, and follow me. This is the beginning of the Christian, and it was with me, guys. When I was a teenager, I knew if I was going to follow Jesus, my father was fairly well-to-do. I came from a fairly well-to-do family. And I'd lived pretty good all my life. I had a hot red Austin Healey sports car in high school. Not too many kids had that when they were 16. I had most everything I wanted. And I realized, when I meditated on the Sermon on the Mount, I realized if I did not and could not and would not trust him with my money, then I couldn't trust him with anything. And there was just so many verses on this in the gospel. It's just loaded. And I was just talking to my brother Rich today. My heart breaks because, do you know this is the main problem with all of us? Is trusting God with materialism. This is the biggest problem. And I love you guys here, and I love a lot that I know are watching this. And I tell you, if you don't get this in your life, you will miss the power and the presence and the joy of Christ in your life. And so I'm sharing this with you for that reason. I want you to experience what I've experienced. And I know you're not if you don't put all your livelihood on the altar. If you don't you say, God, my job is your job. I'll have this job if you want. I'll move. I won't do this. I won't do that. God, it's yours. We usually follow Jesus as long as we can do what we want with our money. Well, I want to tell you, if that's your Christian life, you are missing so much. And it makes me weep for Christians because I know God's blessing in my life started the day I trusted him, and literally he took me to the cleaners. He had me give it all up. Every one of the apostles gave it up. Did you know that? Every one of the apostles. Remember what the apostles said? Peter said, Jesus, all of us, we've all left everything and followed you. And Jesus said, no man will leave his father, his mother, his wife, his brother, his children, his house, his farm, for me or my sake, or he will get 100 times more in this life and the life to come. And so I want to encourage you, I want to encourage us to follow this example. And yet Paul, as he shared this with the Christians, he went on to say, but I never used this right of mine. I can just tell you, some people said, Jim, you can live that life when you're single. I remember when I was single, and I remember older men that were my age now. I remember they would say to me, well, Jim, that's great. We love you. Keep going. But when you get married, it may be a little different. How many times? If I heard that once, I bet I heard it 100 times when I was single. Because I would preach the same message I preach to you right now. And they'd say, oh, you can say it because you're single. And they all told me that. I think they got convicted. I remember one brother who was a leader in a church, an elder in a church. And he said, well, when I was your age, I used to do that too. But then I got married and I had all these needs. Well, you know, I got married. I never told anybody my need. And I was going full-time for Christ. And then I remember someone would say to me, well, Jim, wait until you have children. We had twins. We started out with twins. Then I had 3. Then I had 4. Then I had 5. Then I had 6. Then I had 7. Then I had 8. Then I had 9. We never told anybody our needs. Never. God provided. And I'm going to tell you something else. For 20 years, we gave money away every month. We never passed a collection plate. Never once did I ever ask money from anybody. And God never once missed a meal with us. And almost every month, for years, I was giving money to other spiritual leaders. Paul said, I know how to abound. I've been in situations where I've abounded. And I know how to be abased. And I know how to be abased. See, that isn't the issue, whether you got millions of dollars or $10. It's all his. Money is a root of all evil.
He says it's the root of all kindness.
All kinds of evil. All kinds of evil.
The love of money.
The love of money.
The love of money.
The love of money. Yes. Not money.
Money's just a tool.
Not money. The love of money. The love of money. Absolutely. Not money. Yeah. There's times that I was worth millions. And yet, I didn't love it then. There's times when I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from. I didn't love it then. But I'm sharing personally with you because I want to tell you, if you don't get this in your life, you haven't started living for Christ. It's the first thing that Jesus asked for everybody that followed him. Remember, one guy says, oh, I want to follow you, but, Jesus said, I want to go home first. I forgot what he wanted to do, say goodbye to him. He says, bury his father. And Jesus said, the foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests. I don't have any place to lay my head. Another one wanted to look at some land they bought. Another one wanted to go because of his wife, wanted to go back and check his wife out or something. Remember, they all had excuses, really good excuses. Guess what? Jesus didn't stop and wait for him. He said, I'll just sit right here and wait. You go check your wife out. You go check the land out. You go bury your dad. You go do this. I'll wait for you. He didn't wait. Money is determining your Christian life. That's where you start. And that's why God at times gave me many millions of dollars, and at times, like Paul, had nothing. Materialism will determine your Christian life at the beginning. Then there's other things that will affect it. Then there's other areas that will affect it. But because I love you, I'm sharing this with you. Give him your money. Give him your job. Give him your time. Give him yourself. I remember, I think it was Hudson Taylor. He said, if he's not Lord of all, he's not Lord at all. And Paul said, but I've never used this right of mine. I've never asked once anybody for money for all my preaching. Neither am I writing this now so anybody will give me anything. And I'm not saying this to you guys, so you'll give me anything. Believe you me. God is my witness. I would rather die before anybody could take this honorable reputation from me, Paul said, and so would I. I don't want your money. I want you to give your money to Christ. I want you to give your life to Christ. I don't need your money, but Christ died for you. And I dare say, God knows, I don't know. But if you haven't said, Christ, my career is yours. My job is yours. What does it mean to seek him first? Did you know, in the context, to seek the kingdom of God first relates to your money. To seek the kingdom of God first relates to your money. It relates to your career. It relates to your job. You cannot seek. You can't even start seeking him first without putting that first. Look at verse 16. John.
I always got these little sayings for everything. Okay, there's one for this one too. And it goes, it said, you can't, we know you can't take it with you, your wealth, but you can definitely.
You can send it on ahead.
But you can send it on ahead.
That's a good one, John. I like that.
So it helps you remember.
So what I say to other spiritual leaders is follow the example of Paul. I know guys that have salaries, but they don't have the power that some of us have where we've seen God do miracles in our lives, in the material areas. I'm not at all concerned about money. I've lived 50 years seeing God do miracles. I don't care a hoot. And look, if you die, that's the best thing that can happen to you. You go to heaven. What are you worried about? What are you worried about? Honestly, Paul said, I'd rather depart and be with the Lord. It's not better, he said. He said it's far better. Far better. I remember just before I got married, I thought that's the best thing. If you're single, you guys know, if you're single and you don't have the gift to be single, the most driving thing in your life will be to get a girl. It was for me anyhow. I didn't have the gift. I prayed for the gift to be single. I prayed for years to have the gift to be single. I never had the gift to be single. And so then I got the most beautiful, most wonderful, I'm sorry guys, I got the last greatest woman on earth. And before I married her, weeks before I got her, I prayed every day, oh, Jesus, come back today. I figured that was the biggest sacrifice I could ever make, was to pray that Jesus would come before I would get married and mean it. He wants to be first. He wants to be first. And so I too, by the grace of God, would rather die before anybody can take this honorable reputation from me. And I wish to God more spiritual leaders would follow Paul's example and would follow my example in this, because they would be more powerful. They would be more influential. And they would be more happy. Verse 16. However, this is interesting. I mean, I just have to say, I identify, so much with what the apostle. You can identify with the Apostle Paul if you do what he did. And you can. Anybody can. I did what he did with the money. So I can identify. I embrace so much. I know what he's saying. I feel what he said because I did what he did. Verse 16, however, I can't take any credit for any of this. Oh my goodness. You guys think, boy, Jim's really boasting. He didn't ever ask anybody for money. But I'll tell you why I can't take any credit. For the same reason Paul couldn't, and here's why. I have had no choice in the matter. I'm under orders with an inward compulsion that I must tell everybody about the good news of Jesus Christ. I fear not to. I'm afraid. I couldn't imagine making a criteria of me discipling anybody, teaching. I cannot imagine in the mildest dream that could ever be a basis for me sharing everything or not sharing. I would be scared to death. Paul said, I would fear not to. He was under a compulsion. He was afraid not to. Look at verse 17. I am not doing this voluntarily, nor am I doing it for pay. So you might have thought with myself, Jim was volunteering. No, I was never volunteering. Nor was I doing it for pay, because I wasn't usually getting paid. But I wasn't volunteering either. I have to do it, Paul said. I have to do it, Paul said. And I can tell you I have to do it. I'm under God's stewardship. He's entrusted with me, Paul said, his invaluable, life-changing good news. Do you realize that? I mean, how can you think of anything? God, the creator of the universe, has entrusted this message. How can we make, Paul said, and all leaders, all spiritual teachers, all elders, all pastors need to see this. How in the world are they hirelings? Do they only work for money? What a pathetic motivation. Verse 18. So how then am I rewarded? Or how am I blessed then? Here's how I'm blessed. I preach the good news without ever asking anyone for money, not using the full right I have for preaching the gospel. That's what blesses me, Paul said. That's what blesses me. And that is so much better blessing than money, saying, you give me so much and I'll keep preaching. I can't tell you how it compares. I feel so sorry for most pastors who are preaching because they're getting paid and would stop preaching the day they stop getting paid. I feel so sorry for them. They don't begin to have the blessing or the power. Okay. So Christian, you need to use your money. I've used mine. You do it as I've done it. You do it as Paul did it. Follow his example. And if you ever get to a point where you're a spiritual leader and you're preaching and you're teaching and you're shepherding, don't you ever ask anybody for money if you want to experience the power and the great blessing that Paul experienced. And that I can tell you by his mercy and kindness that I've experienced. Because I followed his example. Okay. Now this is point 2. You've heard of, we were talking about, who's the guy, How to Win Friends and Influence? Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You know, the Apostle Paul has a book on how to win friends and influence people, and it's right in this chapter. You guys are going to learn something here real quick here, okay? Don't forget about money, though, okay? Don't forget about how much money you give to your pets. Don't forget about how you would feel upset if you ever worked for somebody and they didn't pay you. Don't ever forget that, because those are the 2 examples Paul used. Your animals and working for somebody. Your spiritual leaders. We must provide. And I want to tell you, this is so important, and I'm not just saying it for our circle here. For us to multiply hundreds and thousands of house churches, we have got to use our money to support men getting the gospel out. In churches, they use their money to build buildings. Use our money to support men, to free up men, to be preaching and teaching. This relates to reaching the world with the gospel. If we have 10 men, 10 men ought to be able to support 1 man full time. If every man gives 10% of what he has, that 1 man will have an average of what all those 10 have, correct?
Yes.
So if you have a house church of 10 people, you ought to be supporting 1 full-time man. 10 families ought to be supporting a minimum of 1 full-time man. If we have 20, we can support 2. If we have 30, we can support 3. In churches, many of them that have hundreds can barely support 1. We cannot reach the world unless you get this message. Unless you see you're supposed, as Jesus said, yes, you should tithe. Matthew 23, chapter 20, verse 23. And Paul used the very tithe of the priest in this chapter. Look at the law, he said. Look at those Levites. They were working in the temple, and they were getting the tithe from the people. We cannot multiply if we don't get this message. This is the ABC of the Christian life. We have got to get this. And I know some, for example, one brother that has read 4 years ago our little book, Church Revolution, and they've now seen 2,700 house churches, and they need to give 10% of their money. So there could be for every house church at least 1 or 2, depending on how large it is, full-time men preaching the gospel. Then we'll reach our cities. We need to free men. Look, I've said don't put it in buildings, don't put it in programs, don't put it in projects. In the New Testament, they put all their money in 2 areas. Do you know that? Only 2 areas. They gave it to their spiritual leaders and any Christians in their group that was in financial need. And we'll do that. We'll do that. As long as they weren't lazy and idle. If those Christians weren't lazy or idle, you will not go hungry. And I've always said, and I've been with you. For example, let me tell you one example. I've got to just tell you this. When I started out, because God had proved this when I got my meal 2 or 3 times in Greeley. A couple years later, I was with about 40, 50 students. I let them all out for a whole summer. And I didn't have $50 in my pocket, and they all came with me. They didn't have to pay anything. They didn't even think about how we were going to eat. I didn't frankly think much about it either. We went also, and I remember the great old sages, the spiritual old elders. Jim, what are you doing? Where are you going? How are you going to feed? How are you going to take care of these people? Well, actually, I did kind of have an idea. I thought we'd maybe paint signs or paint addresses on the curbs when we ran out of money, go door to door and try to make money. And I expected we had just enough to go for a couple of days, and I expected and I was kind of had this plan of a little bit of how we would all of us students would go door to door. Can we, we're glad to paint your things. You can't read your sign on your curbs. And I was thinking of ways we could make enough money to eat. Do you know about 50 of us went all summer and God provided for all 50? I mean, that wasn't like 5 million like Moses. But you don't go out by yourself. I went with 50. And God provided for me and all 50 of us every day for 3 months. And I had $50 when I started. I had more than that when I finished. I'm telling you the truth. I had hundreds of dollars at the end of the summer. I started with 50 and 50 kids. I didn't ask anybody for money. I didn't tell anybody we ever had a need. Those kids never gave me any money. Most of them were just young college students. They didn't have 2 cents to rub it. In fact, I tried to think back how we survived. I don't know how we did. I can't remember all the things. I never thought about it. We were just out preaching and teaching and baptizing. And someday I need to try to remember how it happened. I don't know how it happened. I thought we were going to paint addresses on curbs. We never painted any addresses. And God provided and kept going. And then after that summer, the different students stayed in different churches that we had started. Then a dozen of us, we kept going. We kept preaching month after month, year after year. And then getting married, and then having families. And we're still going. And God's still providing. Okay. How to win people. See, Paul's been building up, hasn't he? He talked about all sorts of things. Having a holy church. He talks about money. And here's how to win people according to God. So I'm totally free and not bound to anybody. Now, mind you guys, listen, think about this for just a minute. Remember, we have liberty. Paul said, I have a right to demand you pay me for sharing with you. Because according to the law, you were to tithe. And if you didn't, and I think that's still true today, then you won't be blessed. And Paul had a right to demand it as a spiritual leader. And every spiritual leader, every preacher and teacher has a right to demand it. Most do demand it. I encourage leaders not to. Here's another right. Now Paul is saying, I'm totally free. I'm not bound to anybody. I've got liberty. I can do whatever I want. Yeah? Nonetheless, look at the verse. I have chosen to put myself in bondage under everyone, to be everyone's slave, so that I might win everyone. I'm free. I can do whatever I want. But Paul says, I've made a choice. I've decided to become a slave to Ben, to John, to Richard, to Madison, to Titus, to every single person. Paul says, I've chosen to be your slave. Do you want to win people? You don't need to go to Dale Carnegie. Be somebody's slave. I guarantee you they'll like you. They'll love you. Do you want people to love you? Just be their slave. Just be their servant. They'll love you to pieces. Do you want to have influence? You say, I can't have influence if I'm a slave. Jesus said, he that is the servant of all will be the chiefest of all. You know how I can lead people? I just become their servant. Any way I can. And I want to grow in this. I want to learn how to be more of a servant. I need to be more sensitive to your needs. You can be a leader. Every man, every woman, you can be a leader. But you've got to become a servant. And the one who is the servant of all, he'll be the chiefest. He'll be the chief. He'll be the head. He'll be the top. The one who serves the most. The one who's the slave. That's what Paul says. This is how we're going to win people, gang. This is how we're going to win. This is how we're going to build people up. Is this powerful stuff or not? This is powerful.
Very powerful.
Look, this is revolutionary. God's telling you how to win people. Paul said, I'm not bound to anybody. I'm free. I don't have to do anything for any one of you guys, Paul said. But I have chosen to be a bond slave to you. Be a slave by choice. So that I might win every single person I can. Look at verse 20. That's the generic principle. Now he goes into the specifics. There's 4 of them. To Jews, he says. When I'm with Jews, I'm just like a Jew, so I can win more Jews. How how many times I've heard Christians say, well, that's not me. Well, stop being me and start being like them. I've heard some of you say, well, that's not me. That's not him. That's not her. What? Unless a grain of seed falls to the ground and dies, it's going to remain alone. Do you want to be alone or do you want to produce a lot? Don't worry what you're like. Stop trying to be you. If you're with a Jew, become a Jew, okay? Become a Jew. Oh, but I'm a Christian. I can't be a Jew. I'm not going to be a Jew. I'm free. Paul said, to those Jews, I become like a Jew. That's the first group. Now look at the next group. To Judaized Gentiles. These are not Jews, but these are Gentiles that are legalistic. Oh, I'm not going to be legalistic. They're bound under the law. Not me. I'm free from the law. Oh, not me. I know freedom. Paul said, not me. I'm going to put myself like those Judaized Gentiles. When I'm with Gentiles who are following Jewish law, I follow Jewish law. This isn't even necessarily the Mosaic law. It's their traditions. This is the mature person. The immature person is the person that is the way I am, the me. The mature person becomes all things. When I'm with these Gentiles who follow Jewish law, I follow Jewish law. Though I don't have to follow it, I do so that I might win more of these Judaized Gentiles. That's the second category. Gentiles that are legalistic. That's you and me. To lawless Gentiles. This is the third category. These are Gentiles. They don't have any law. They're crude. They're people many of us might not like to be around. When I'm with Gentiles who do not follow God's law, who don't know anything about it, they're crude. I live like them so I can win more of these lawless Gentiles. But I do not violate God's law, which is Christ's law. It's interesting. To the next category of Gentiles, to sensitive Gentiles. When I'm with Gentiles that have sensitive consciences in anything and everything, I become sensitive to whatever they're sensitive to so that I might win more of these sensitive, conscious Gentiles. These categories are brought out in the Greek in every one of these categories. I become sensitive to whatever they're sensitive to. And he ends with this one. To everyone else, I become like everyone so that in every way I may win and save others. So in other words, if I've missed any category of people, I'm going to be like them. This is how we win people. Becoming all things to all people, but by all means, I might save some. Becoming a slave, becoming a servant. I'm free. I'm not going to, not now. I'm going to make myself your slave. Be a slave. Let's pray.